Hello and welcome to the Empowered Curiosity podcast. Today's guest is Veda Austin. Veda is a fascinating human. She is a water researcher, public speaker, mother, artist, and author. She's someone who has dedicated the last 10 years observing and photographing the life of water, and she believes that water is fluid intelligence, observing itself through every living organism on the planet and in the universe. Her primary focus is photographing water in what she calls the state of creation. It's the state between liquid and ice as water is beginning to freeze. Water goes through this remarkable crystalline phase, almost this plasma phase. And what she does is she takes photos while water's in that phase. And what shows up in these photos is this awareness of not only creation, but thought and intention. And it all shows up through this beautiful imagery that can be found on water. I feel like it is impossible for me to really convey what that means. And so I asked Veda in this interview to explain what that is. And so you're going to have to listen to that explanation yourself. But also, this explanation feels a bit incomplete without the actual pictures. And so Veda has an extensive gallery of photos in this crystalline state that you can access through her Instagram, which is VedaAustin_water. I really encourage you to go check those out. It's just fascinating when we are able to interact with an element in this really intimate way. And it really feels like water is trying to have a conversation with us through these pictures. And so please go check that out. So what Veda does is she brings a message of hope and joy from the very source of water itself. She says that water is transparent. It knows no color, creed, or religion. Water does not judge, nor does it label. It will enter the body of an ant as easily as it will enter the body of a king or a homeless person or a tree or a dragonfly. Water is our constant companion from the moment that we are conceived. It is always with us. Even upon death, it is water that evaporates from the physical, rising upwards into the heavens. I feel like this is a really great space to share with you that Veda and I are doing a bit of collaboration. If you're listening to this before June 3rd, 2023, Veda is hosting a masterclass on water. And specifically, it is how water shows up in different religions, different spiritual practices, different ancestral traditions. The name of that masterclass is called Water, God, and Spirit. And I will be one of many presenters. What she's done is she has invited several speakers to come speak about how water shows up in the realm of spirituality, in their particular tradition or religion or spiritual practice. I will, of course, be lending my voice in terms of the Taoist perspective. I'll be presenting with my dear friend, Chris Miller, who, if you're in the Empowered Curiosity sphere, you'll know that he and I do a lot of really nerdy talks about Taoist medicine. In particular, we do a monthly Taoist Lunar Wisdom call in which we dive into the energetics of that particular moment in the season as expressed through the hexagrams and how it's expressed through nature. So if you're somebody who is into that kind of thing, which I imagine that many of my community members are, we are all animists at Spirit. We all are wanting to deepen our relationship with these amazing aspects of nature, these individual characters that we call elements. And water is, they're all my favorite, right? But I feel like my relationship to water has deepened in just having this conversation with Veda. So I'm really excited to be able to share this conversation with you. Before we get into the interview, this is one of the most vulnerable and intimate interviews that I've conducted. And Veda shares many aspects of her life. And some of those aspects of her life may feel a bit activating to folks. And so we do talk about domestic abuse, we talk about trauma, we talk about violent events that have happened in her life. And I am sharing this so that you can be prepared that this is the depths of our conversation. I mean, would you expect anything less than that from somebody who has spent their life exploring water? But also, I want to give you an opportunity to do what you need to do in order to tend to your own nervous system and tend to your own activation points. So, here is Veda Austin. Hello, Veda. I'm so excited to be able to chat with you. I've actually been following you for a while now, and you are one of those people that I've been really dying to have a conversation with, but because I'm trying to like speak for spiritual entrepreneurs, I'm like, "Ooh, how can I bridge the gap between your work with water and this work with spiritual entrepreneurship?" And the idea came to me because you shared on Instagram a experiment that I'm really excited to just like dive into. And I think that this experiment really bridges that gap between talking about water in the way that you do, and then also being able to make that applicable and practical for spiritual entrepreneurs. So thank you so much to agreeing for this conversation. And yeah, this is one I've been looking forward to like for so long.
Well, it's really my pleasure to be here. And I mean, I'm an entrepreneur myself, and
Hmm.
I think that just generally means that you don't, you know, you have one of those personalities that is very creative and you like to kind of do your own thing.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur, but the truth is, I think anyone that's working for themselves is in fact that. And I think it's wonderful to be able to create things and manifest them from an idea. And
Hmm.
I always encourage my children to do that for
Hmm.
themselves as well. So
Hmm.
I'm looking forward to this topic because it's actually one I don't get to talk about, and I'd like to talk about um, something that I also find many people within a spiritual realm or community tend to sometimes have trouble with, and that is like finding a value to what they're sharing and feeling sometimes bad about it because that doesn't seem such a spiritual thing to do to like make people pay for your services.
Hmm.
And I went through that myself. That's an
Hmm.
evolution and came out a completely different side.
Hmm.
And I used to call myself a the huntress because I was a single mum, always trying to make ends meet, and always
Hmm.
finding things to like make sure everybody, you know, had a roof over their head and food and all that kind of stuff. Um, and eventually that evolved after a long time. And
Yeah.
I don't think I realized I was in fight or flight that whole time.
Mm. Hmm.
And I think that happens a lot. And then I made a very big decision to not go ahead and do something that felt out of spiritual alignment that was being kind of almost, it seemed like it was being imposed on me, but
Yeah.
more and more and more, you have to take ownership of what you allow in your life.
Hmm.
And so I said no to something, and that no to something really forced me to go, well, I have no idea what I'm going to do now.
Hmm.
So I started painting because that's what I used to do for myself years and years ago. And then from that, I stepped into what I call the goddess, which I consider to be where all the same things can be going on in your life, but in fact, the goddess simply stands in a space of attracting what she needs in rather than going out to hunt for it. And it was a very simple but very clear transition
Mm.
whereby you start to realize that the more self-worth you have, the more you attract into your life,
Hmm.
and that is good. You know,
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
that is everything that you're wanting, and that seems like just people just say that to a lot of people. They feel
Yeah.
so stuck. Oh yeah, but that's her story and that's his story and da 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 da. But when you start actually realizing that that's a truth and that you just get to start, it seems so, it's actually really easy. You just start really taking care of yourself and liking yourself and believing in yourself. And it is a direct reflection of what comes straight back to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, as you're speaking about this, I'm feeling called to name the embodiment of the element of water in even just the energy that you're speaking, because I mean, it's no secret that your element that you're so connected to is water. And when I think about water, it is the most yin of the elements. You know, we've talked before, you and I, and, you know, according to this Taoist tradition of like, of yin versus yang, like water is the most yin of all of the elements. And when we sit with that intentionality of yin, we often think about yin as being passive, as not having movement, of sort of just being instead of doing, which can feel like maybe there's like a lack of energy behind it. But there's the energy of intention is so fruitful, right? And that's kind of what you're speaking of, is like sitting and being in a state of like receivership. And there's a lot of like the analogy that I want to make here is like in fertilization, the egg's role is to not travel very far, but to like hang out and actually be in a state of choosiness. You know, it's the sperm's job to go and like, you know, do all the action to get to the egg. But people used to think that the egg was just sitting there and not doing anything. And it was like this gauntlet and the survival of the fittest when it came to the sperm. But really, what we're seeing in the scientific literature now is the egg is scanning and releases an enzyme that creates an opening for that sperm to enter. And that's the intentionality that I'm hearing in your goddess phase of like receivership, but it's not a passive receivership. It is a very active, choosing, intentional receivership. And so I just want to name that, like, already you're embodying water in this way that feels very exciting to me.
You. Oh, so much I think water just needs to flow. You know, and that's the thing. If we're forcing not flowing, then we know that there's an issue. Whenever I find something's just too hard, I realize, okay, I need to take another look at this. And you know, you talk about water, and we tend to think of water in a passive way, but try looking at face to face with a tidal wave. You know, tsunami. And so, you know, there's water has so much power, but also so much perseverance. And I think that that's very true, because it can, you know, time after day, it can wear down mountains and rocks. And so there's this perseverance, which I really admire when I think about even myself as the water element, the perseverance, but also like that being in flow is very important. But water becomes the cup, you know, it becomes the teapot, like Bruce Lee says. And so it's like, what do we want to become? What do we want to enter into next in this phase of our lives? What do we, as bodies of water, want to embody and represent and reflect out? So, yeah, there's lots of ways we can look at anything we do through the lens of water.
Yeah.
Given that by molecular count, you know, we are 99% water, and that even our eye lens is 99% water. So we literally see everything through the lens of water. So sometimes I do wish we could see ourselves the way water sees us, and that's probably going to make more sense when we get deeper into the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. So just to spark the conversation, I would love for you to share this experiment that like, oh my God, I like literally I dropped my phone and like had to like run and tell my husband about this experiment when I saw it on your Instagram page. So I'd love to hear about it in your own words because you described it beautifully on Instagram. But I'm going to share my screen. So for those of you who are listening to this as a podcast, if you want to actually see the slides that I'm talking about, hop on over to YouTube because we'll have this up as a video. Or I will actually link the Instagram post that you put up. That way folks can reference it for themselves if they don't want to do the YouTube thing. So I'll put it down below. So the visual is so, so potent. So I don't want to like rob people of that experience. So please, whichever way you decide, go check out the visuals. But
And I'll try and
here,
be as descriptive in my wording as I possibly can.
yeah.
So, so basically, this is a study that I did because I was interested in informed waters. So I haven't just studied water. I mean, for anyone that doesn't know me, I'm a water researcher and crystallographer. So I specialize in photographing water in a specific state of freezing after it's been influenced by something or a picture or a thought or any of these things. And I have a body of over 40,000 photos that suggest that water is very responsive and not just reactive to human consciousness. So
Hmm.
as I evolved, I started photographing other fluids. And I was thinking one of the most informed fluids naturally would likely be amniotic fluid.
Hmm.
But I wasn't able to, it was very hard for me to get that. So I went to the next best thing and I thought that I would do a study on eggs. And I made an interesting observation that really fresh, free range eggs create 6 specific patterns that I've named. One of them, interestingly, is what I call the feather because it looks like feathers. This is in chicken, duck, goose, and quail eggs. All bird eggs seem to produce these same patterns, and the others I've also named. I don't know if there's any. I don't know if I've shared any of them in this particular.
I don't remember that being shared. This is new information for me, so I don't think you shared it in this post.
Okay, so people are getting a little extra, and so and so the caged hen eggs can only produce 2 of those 6 patterns.
Mm.
So when I was listening to Luc Montagnier's work, and he's sadly passed, he won a Global Peace Prize for um, a Nobel Peace Prize, sorry, for his discovery of AIDS. He's a very serious scientist, but you know his work was quite extraordinary in that he did one experiment, which has been repeated by some people, I understand, where he has 2 vials of water. One has a sequence of DNA in it and one doesn't. They sit side by side overnight with radiant light, in radiant light and with a low hertz frequency. And then he moves the one with the DNA in it away, and he puts some kind of precursor powder to DNA into the one to detect whether there is any DNA in the water, and they discover that there is, and it has similar, basically the same sequence as the one that's right it was sitting next to. So
Wow.
it's kind of called DNA teleportation, which is kind of nuts, really. You
Hmm.
look at my work and you go, whoa, and then you look at his work and then you think, well, what does that mean? You know,
I
what,
feel
what
like we're talking about quantum physics already here.
is, well, we can't not. And so I thought, well, what if I put a free range egg, since I know its patterns very well,
Mm.
and caged hen eggs side by side, because I know those patterns very, very well. I've done hundreds, actually probably thousands of these tests with both.
Mm.
And so I thought, well, I wonder if one will influence the other. And so the next day I did the crystallography for both, and I observed that the free range egg stayed the same, beautiful patterns. The caged hen egg, its patterns had begun to improve. And I shared it on social media. And this isn't, I'm getting to this sharing you've got here.
Yeah.
And the first one I ever shared, people were like, yeah. But what happens if you surround it by bad eggs, the good egg with the bad eggs? It's going to go bad,
Mm.
which is sadly the state of the world. And so I did that. I did that twice. If you want to just move
Flip to the
along
next one.
that one. So this is a visual of what a free range egg looks like on the left and a caged hen egg looks like on the right. You can see that the caged hen egg in this one is really lacking any of those patterns, those extra two patterns that it can make. In this one, it's really not making. So you can see a very clear visual difference. Those kind of flower-like shapes that raised, I call them the volcano. And it's one of the most complex patterns that I see in eggs and free-range eggs. So if we go along to the next one.
I think this is what you already sort of explained here.
Let's go. And again. No, yeah, so I explained it. So this is good because I did control. So here we have the free-range control at the top left and the caged control on the right. And you can see that the caged one lacks any real complex structures, and the free-range egg looks beautiful with those flower-like shapes that we become so familiar with. So down the bottom, you can see the way I put the eggs, how I surrounded the eggs in that kind of diamond shape around the free-range egg. So the free-range egg is in the middle, and it is surrounded by a number 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 caged hen eggs, which was about because I wanted to keep them in the same batch. So both with, they were all from the same batch. Sure. So then if we move along, what we'll start to see is that the free-range egg in the middle still has those big volcano shapes. It looks just like I would imagine. But the curious thing, of all of the many studies I've done on caged hen eggs, and I've never seen them look any more complex than two patterns, is that the caged hen eggs that are surrounding and that are most close to the free-range egg have all begun to take on the patterns of the free-range egg and become extremely complex, whereas the four on the outer edges have improved, but they have not improved as significantly. Yeah. And this is really showing this kind of healing by proximity. So if we go to, I think there should be another one which shows this test too. Okay, so here we have... So
there's the control again?
Yep, two controls and the sequence in which I've put the eggs together, so the free-range egg in the middle and the caged hen egg surrounding it. And here we have the result where you see that the free-range egg looks just like it more, the rest of the free-range egg still looks lovely. And interestingly, the caged hen eggs that surround it look almost identical to it, and the ones further away still improved, but not as much. Yeah. So there is this wonderful consistency, and the takeaway from this really, if you apply it to people, and consider that egg albumin essentially is 90% water. So you kind of add that into the equation, and the simple analogy is that if we heal ourselves, we naturally heal others. And so there is this idea within that we radiate our own energy. It's kind of like, there's some people we just want to hang out with because they make us feel good. And this doesn't mean that somebody needs to be like a kind of a completely evolved person, and they're sitting in the Himalayas, and they're like a saint, and and all these things. The everyday people can be fun to be around, and sometimes that is like, there are some people you just want to go to because they make you feel good about you. Yeah. There are some people that just attract people. You just watch them in the room. They just have this energy. They might not be the most gorgeous or beautiful person in the room, but everyone wants to be around them because they exude this energy. And so it's quite interesting because as we begin to heal and become healing on the inside reflects the outside. And so and this is so true, as even we're seeing with the eggs that we have this beautiful free-range egg which is just exuding energy, but what's interesting is that one of the roles on a more spiritual level of water is to improve things and to upgrade things. And when you think about those eggs, it's interesting because for the most part those none of those eggs were fertilized.
Mm.
So what we're seeing is the potential for information transfer, that like not the potential for information transfer because that's what we're seeing, but we're seeing the potential for life already there.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I began to think, oh, well, I wonder if we were to use eggs from a different species, like
Mm-hmm.
crocodiles or snakes, and we saw different patterns in the egg albumin, then maybe that means that this is information for the species, which I think would be extremely interesting,
Mm-hmm.
because that would then suggest that this is a little bit like the morphic resonance that Rupert Sheldrake talks about how all life has a kind of memory of its form
Mm-hmm.
and function rather than embedded in the DNA as much. So it's quite an interesting idea to explore, is that perhaps the real information is held within the amniotic sac or fluid, or the albumin of the bird eggs in the fluids.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very interesting idea.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that this is where I got so excited from your study is it shows this concept of healing by proximity. I think that there's a lot out there in our culture, in our collective, that thinks that as healers, we have to be doing something. We need to be the active verb of healing other people, that we need to be like, in a way, almost like imposing our influence on somebody else in order to aid their healing process. And what you've demonstrated in this experiment is actually no, like that egg, all it did was just sit in the middle and just be itself, you know?
So
And right? And it's just the simple act of being and embodying is actually medicine for the collective, is sort of how I, sort of interpreted this experiment. And it's something that as I continue to support clients and continue to work on my own healing process, I get astounded when I feel like there's, as I get deeper into my own deeper layers of healing, there's a resonance that seems to come out that attracts, other beings that are resonating in that same field. And I think that that's kind of what I love about this experiment is this, it captures this concept of potential energy so beautifully, of like we are all capable of being holders of potentiated energy through the 99% of us that is water.
I think it's a wonderful way to see it, and I love that idea. We only just need to be, and I think that that's a very important thing because we're so much in the mode of doing. And I like your analogy because you don't hear that much, where a lot of healers feel like they need to really do something to make a difference, and I think it's more like we really need to be, and to be something, and be actually what, the reflection of what we want to see in the world as well, so that there are examples out there for people to go, oh well, that's inspiring, he or she is inspiring. I remember my teacher in India, he once said to me, that there's some of the greatest saints and people essentially that have ever graced the earth, the energy that they were like vessels of divine love.
Mm.
And that energy that exuded out of them would spontaneously heal people that they would never meet, because their energy went so far outside of their body, miles, miles and miles. And for some people, he said, even to other parts of the world. And so that took it to a whole nother level, which I was like, wow, when you can see this little egg has this kind of radius, well, imagine what we have, and imagine the potential that we have as living beings and living human beings. And it's not that, and that is in the potential of the water, of the fluids.
Yeah.
So we have all of this water flowing through us now in this animated body, which has the ability to think and create.
Hmm.
I think this is amazing. And one of
Hmm.
the things you said, which I think is true too, is like we naturally attract people when we are doing something that we love. And maybe you worded it slightly differently, but I've seen that, and I think that looking for finding your purpose is certainly probably um, but I would say certainly one of the ways in which you can um, really become more of a happier person. It's
Hmm.
not so much going out looking for happiness,
Yeah.
because happiness is something that, as we can see, we can actually have everything we want and still not be happy,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
everything we think we want. But when you have a purpose that's greater than yourself, it's going to be the thing that gets you out of bed when you really just want to lie in. It's going
Hmm.
to be the thing that gives you passion about life, and you feel like you're leaving something, you're leaving the world just a little bit better
Hmm.
than when you came into it,
Hmm.
by doing something that you really love and that you believe in. And for some people, that can be being a parent.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be some one specific thing,
It
but
also
some
doesn't have to be your job.
it doesn't have to be your job.
Hmm.
It can be anything you want it to be. And I think, we tend to put things into boxes,
Hmm.
but water doesn't like to be boxed. It doesn't like to be held. It doesn't like, it even releases through us, so that there's always a movement within living beings.
Yeah.
So I think it's extremely important um, to kind of, like, we can be really hard on ourselves too. So I learned something very interesting from something I watched. This woman was talking about the 5 second countdown. I don't know
Mm.
if you've heard of it.
Mm-mm.
I found it very helpful. Well, apparently, when we hesitate, if we hesitate too long, our brain will think that we're in danger and will
Mm.
give you every single reason why you shouldn't do that thing you're wanting to do.
Mm.
So if you can, but there is 5 seconds. So if you think of something that you want to do, maybe it's like tell someone something you've been putting off, and it's important to you, right?
Mhm.
But it just seems hard.
Mhm.
Well, you wake up that morning, right? Today's the day. I'm gonna do it, and you do it. You just do it. Pick up the phone within 5 seconds and do it, or else your brain will just tell you all the reasons why you shouldn't do it.
Mm.
Same thing. I want to go to the gym. Why would your brain think that would put you in danger? I don't really know, but somehow some part of you is in resistance to it. So if you're in resistance to it, there's some part of you where your brain just kind of turns on you and goes, okay, dangerous.
Mm.
So if
Mhm.
we hesitate, the longer we hesitate, the less likely we're going to do something. So if we do it within 5 seconds of thinking it, then and make take action, just get out of bed, go to the gym, like just do it, and don't hesitate. And that's been very helpful, because the brain, and we can give ourselves a million excuses of why we can't do something. Oh, I'm not ready yet. It's not the perfect timing. Sometimes being thrown into a situation helps you to really deal with it immediately.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I mean, I think timing is good. It's good to be organized. It doesn't apply for everything. But in the things we're afraid of, we tend to, but we want to do, there is that
Mhm.
kind of turmoil that can happen.
Yeah.
And that 5 second rule can be very helpful.
Mm. Mhm. I find that sometimes when I'm thinking of like particular like difficult conversations that I've wanted to have, and you know oftentimes we build things up to a point, and it's not even the like conversation itself that I'm afraid of. It's like now there's like 10 different stories behind how that conversation can go,
Yeah.
versus like, ooh, I'm just gonna jump into the deep end, and again, like finding that flow and finding that ability to, you know, respond in the moment is such a valuable skill to have.
Oh yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, I recently I'm putting together my next masterclass,
Mm-hmm.
and I was speaking to a lovely lady that reached out. Actually, she's brilliant, brilliant, brilliant woman, fascinating. But the first thing she said to me, she said when we spoke, she said, I was so nervous to reach out to you. She said, I was so scared that you wouldn't be interested in me at all, and that you would have, and she said, I kept thinking that you'd probably already got enough people and that I was just being an imposition. And I said, what made you do it in the end? She said, oh, I thought, well, what have I got to lose? And I think that it's a good question. What do
Yeah.
we have to do? We lose 100% of the things that we don't do.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to redirect the conversation back to this concept of like water for a moment. Because I think that one of the things that water has given me as actually, this came from listening to you on my friend Natalie Ross's podcast. You were on the Earth Speak podcast, and I sort of read the like description of it, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna like, I think it was wintertime when I listened to it. I don't know when you recorded it, but I listened to it in the wintertime. I was like, okay, I'm gonna really fully like dive into this as like as an experience. So I pulled out my watercolors because I was like, I'm gonna play with water, and I took some mushrooms as well. They often help me find a bit of clarity. And as you were speaking, and it was such a beautiful conversation. Go listen to that, listeners, if this is resonating for you. It's another great conversation and completely different from this one. But the message that I got from water in that experience was trust me. And that is such a deep learning that I think I've struggled with for a long time. Like I have trouble trusting people. I have trouble surrendering. I have trouble like letting go and not doing all the things. And I think what I started recognizing is that water is all around us, even in the invisible spaces of air. And so when we think about transmission and you think about the like, well, how does my energy, affect somebody else next to me? How does that egg, that healthy egg albumin affect the other healthy eggs around it? And it's like the thing that's tying us all together as beings is water, and it's the vehicle of movement is water in the air. And so like, that's when I was able to be like, oh, actually, like if I just sit here and be embodied in my own sort of experiences and in my own healing, I can trust that water is going to transmit that through its molecular body.
It does. Well, the water and electrical charge have a lot to do with each other. So, like I mentioned, by molecular count, we're 99% water. To put that into a little perspective, there are more water molecules in our bodies than stars in the Milky Way. So that's if you ever go and look through a telescope and you look up there, that's a heck of a lot of stars. It's trillions and trillions and trillions. And so with that in mind, I think it's also important for us to remember that just by the pure fact that we breathe out, if we have water in the air, even though we don't see it, doesn't mean that it isn't there. It's very much there. And we have electrical charge, which can be read by heart math, so that's not a woo-woo thing at all. And our electrical charge can actually go much, much further out than we imagine that it might, particularly when we're really in a high vibration.
Yeah.
And so when we're in a very high vibration and that electrical charge is actually emanating much further than we might imagine, all the way out to the, well, you can't see my door, but that's several meters away. And the water in the air, some of it is attracted to that electrical charge. It kind of creates, if you imagine like what a spider web looks like when it's covered in dew, I mean, we just have that little bit of a visualization. I mean, it's not identical to that because we're talking about minute particles of water, but there is this kind of web like effect that
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
the water that's attracted to that electrical charge is able to use that charge and travel and send information along it. So when
Mm-hmm.
we go into like a house and something about that house just makes us feel like, oh, I don't like this place. I don't know why I like this place. I don't know why I feel like this about this place, but it's just not resonating for me. It feels heavy, like
Mm-hmm.
feels like something bad happened here.
Mm-hmm.
Dense energy is actually literally denser, and it stays around longer. And
Mm-hmm.
so our energetic web picks up on that information and shares it into our intuition. Our intuition is again the water within our body that is making us
Mm-hmm.
feel something that we can't logically say why we feel like that, except that that's our gut feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And then the same goes for when you meet somebody that you just absolutely feel like you've met them ages ago and somehow you've known each other forever, but it's the first time that you know of in this life anyway that you've met.
Mm-hmm.
And often that is happens when two people's energetic webs, if you will, look very, very similar.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a matching patterning. So rather than it being like when you have that love at first sight thing, people might call that twin flames. It's also kind of like twin patterns, where when you are working with someone, or particularly in relationships, as the love begins to deepen, you'll often find that people begin to mirror each other.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody's talking, and we tend to do this if we're engaged with someone, we like somebody, if their head is tilted, we'll often just naturally tilt our heads, or if their arms doing something, we'll just tend to do that with our arms, and we tend to do it subconsciously. Well, the same thing is happening with the energetic kind of web around us, our webs, this kind of energy, which is an information transfer system, of our energy, and the energy coming in from outside of us, tends to mimic the
Mm-hmm.
person that we care about. And
Mm-hmm.
not only do we find ourselves physically kind of mirroring people, but we're doing the same thing energetically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that as a concept because, like, to me, it's like you're bridging these things that we know from our intuition, know from our like bodily sensory experience. And some people might label that as being a bit woo or a bit spiritual, but then you're also like bringing in the scientific aspect of it, of like, this actually makes sense. Like, we are all interconnected. And, this is one of the beautiful medicines of observing nature is like we start to see that, like, for us to say everyone is connected is not just this like out there sort of a thing. It's like we are literally all connected through this, like, there's water and air everywhere. And so, it's those little moments of transmission that feel like maybe they don't make logical sense, but when it comes to this worldwide web of water, it absolutely makes sense, and it really cements in this concept of the collective influencing each other instead of being these isolated bubbles that like we're all sort of doing our own thing and not influencing each other at all.
Yeah, it's such a blanket statement that we are all connected, and people often kind of just phase over it because it's like, oh yeah, I've heard that 1,000 times.
Yeah.
But like when you have a glass of water in front of you, I mean, that water has gone through the clouds, it's gone through the trees, it's gone through so many different animals and different species. It's been in the oceans, it's been inside of the earth, it's been through some of our ancestors, and it's
Mm-hmm.
managed to find its way to you in your glass. Of all the water in the world, we are lucky enough to have some water right in front of us. And I always think it's quite interesting because I tend to think about that concept quite a lot. And, if we imagine that that really is truly how it is, and by drinking that water, we are getting the information and energy from all of the things that water has been in. Water is also in all our food.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has this, it's so sometimes it's like I have this apple, right? As we eat the apple, is it still an apple once it's in my body? So people could say, well, it's the fuel for the body, but the body is processing the apple. But whilst it's in your body, it's in your body, it's part of your body. And so you have the energy and actually it's quite interesting. You have the energy and the subtle aspects of the apple as well going in within you. So apple is the fruit of this tree, and you think about all of the aspects of that, which we could get into some detail about, but you look at that at all the different types of food that we eat, and you think about the energy of that food coming into your body. So for people that eat meat, then you have the energy of the animal going into you. And it's kind of an interesting idea. I mean, I've been vegetarian personally since I was 8 years old, and 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 that's always been what's right for me. But everybody is different, and so in the similar way that we tend to have a disconnect with water. So we can go to the store and we'll just get a bottle of water, but we don't think about where it came from. We don't even really tend to even look at the label to see exactly what spring it came from, or have we ever been to that spring, or let's Google it and see what that looks like. We don't tend to do that. Same way that we don't tend to associate meat, packaged meat, with an animal, or many of these other things. We tend to have a disconnect. So I think being able to start, if you can go and like collect water yourself, that gives you this amazing connection with the actual source of where it's coming from. But then you think about that. I say that water is not a resource, it is source. And so in that concept, all things that have water have source within them. And so that again is a very powerful thing. And then you think, well, if all of us are a collective and we are all connected through the water, then this idea that someone once gave me could potentially apply. It says, what if water is expressing its consciousness through all living things to observe itself from every perceivable perspective and imperceivable perspective, and that's something to think about. And then
What an interesting concept.
yeah, and then my friend Moses Hackman, he said, that water is the glove on the hand of consciousness. And so, and he's coming at it from a architecture, he's an architect. From his perspective, he sees water as an artist, and that it's working with consciousness. So there's always that idea, is water conscious, or is our consciousness affecting the water? And I don't know that anyone really knows, but I mean, from what I see, it's either conscious or consciousness and water work so intimately together that they behave as one.
Yeah. I mean, even if you think about like a live body versus a dead body, like the thing that gets, pulled out of a body when it is no longer alive is water. All of the rest of your cells, quotation marks, stays within, right? And stays intact. But water then decides, oh, actually, I need to move on and through evaporation, but like I need to move on and influence some other aspect of life. And so I really think about like water and life. I mean, this is such a cliche thing, but it's like they're intricately connected, and they have to be intricately connected, right?
Yeah. And then I think you need to also look at death and in the light of life. And I think water automatically does that and naturally does that, but for a number of reasons. So my dad is Maori, New Zealand native indigenous people, and there's the word for spirit is wairua. It means, very rudimentary way I'm speaking about it, but essentially it means two waters, the spiritual and the physical waters. And I think the spiritual waters are more akin to the air or the ether, and that the physical waters are, the processes by which our body functions. And so the spiritual water, it also is the observer or the witness. It's never judging. And so we can, if you think about it, we live in two worlds, the one we live on and the one we live in. The
Mm-hmm.
one we live on is quite obvious. The one we live in is how we experience the world through our senses. So when we touch something, that feeling comes into the body. When we see something, it's coming in through eyes, and actually it's our brain that really sees. But then our ears are hearing things inside. Our tongue is tasting things inside. And even when we're thinking within the body. We're thinking within the body.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we really experience that's outside of the body? And so one of those things is that we can observe ourselves, and we can do that in various ways. Um, I've interviewed a number of people that have had near-death experiences, and they say that three of them said the same thing. I interviewed more than three, and they said the sense of rising,
Mm.
and then, which is what a gas does. It rises, expands, and cools, which is why people say that they feel spirit is cold, I would imagine. And
Mm.
then they said that they look down upon their body and they watched themselves being resuscitated, and they simply made an observation, and that observation sounded like, oh, I hope that person's going to be okay. There was
Mm.
zero attachment anymore to the body, and it was as an observer. And
Interesting.
so when people, like, for example, my son broke his arm years, months ago now, and he was skateboarding. And I had to take him to hospital because they needed to reset his arm because it was broken pretty badly. And so the doctor said, I'm going to give him ketamine, and he's going to be here, but he's not going to be here. And I've never seen anybody on that before. And so it was injected into his arm, and within um, 4 seconds, my son, who's 15, he said, "What the f?" And he couldn't finish the word. And then his eyes were bulging and his mouth was open, and he was looking around. You could see he was having an experience, but all the while the nurses immediately started working on his arm.
Mm.
And so when he finally came out of that and everything was done, I asked him about his experience, and he said he could see them from the corner of the room. He was in the corner of the room watching them working on his body. So he could
Interesting.
see himself. He could see, and
Interesting.
he even knew a conversation that I'd had with one of the nurses.
Mm.
So that again was, and so then you kind of have to wonder, and how can we still be alive if we don't have our conscious expression or the witness aspect or the spirit within the body? How
Yeah.
can the body still be functioning?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we have functioning water within us, but the spirit clearly needs to be in the body for the body to stay alive, or it needs to have a connection. So that's
Mm-hmm.
why people talk about the silver thread of the
Mm.
spirit. And I think the silver
Mm.
thread is actually the electrical aspect to us, our electrical um, kind of web, if you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
And as long as there's some electrical charge coming out, even if it's weak,
Mm.
then that tether can can bring the spirit back into the body or the consciousness.
Yeah.
And so when somebody is his heart stopped beating, there's still some function, some activity of kinds in the brain for up to 10 to 12 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then Jerry Pollack, who was on my second to last masterclass, he's one of the world's best like water scientists. He shared something I didn't expect him to say, which I'm always excited when someone says something new. And he was talking about one of his students who was doing. They did a study. They wanted to see if um, the exclusion zone water, which is essentially this fourth phase of water that is in our cells. It absorbs more light, it has negative charge, it's more viscous, it has a slightly higher pH, and so these are some of its properties, and it's actually H3O2. So anyway, so that they wanted to see if when a chick, so you can crack an egg and you can start to see if it's fertilized. You can start to observe that the embryo is starting to form, and it doesn't really look like a chick in the very, very early stages, much like we don't look like a person in the very early stages. And they stopped the heartbeat at 4 days, I think he said. And they wanted to see if the exclusion zone water would drop with the other vital signs. And it did drop, but it didn't go to all the way to the end, like to the very zero. And then they put infrared light because this type of water expands with infrared light. And they saw that that water expanded hugely all the way up to the top with the infrared light. And then over the course of about an hour, it went back and then it finally kind of went off.
Mm-hmm.
So he said we may need to, based on that, we may need to rethink about when somebody is actually dead based on when the movement of the fluid stops. Now, we are an ocean, so that means we're salt water. Salt is a crystal. It also has an electrical component. If there is any movement, there is some charge.
Mm-hmm.
So even within that, the Hone Edmonds, who had his heart had stopped beating for 25 minutes, he was able to come back into his body, even though he was in a coma for a long time afterwards. And he ended up writing a book about his experiences and his near-death experience. But I think this applies also to homeopathy, whereby people ask, you know, why are the more diluted remedies more potent? Since they have less and less and less, it seems, of the actual essence itself of the plant or whatever the remedy is. And I think it's because it's becoming more and more and more like spirit. Someone once said that dying is like taking off an uncomfortable shoe. And so there is this huge expansion of what we think we are inside the body to what we really are outside. And I don't want to say that what we are experiencing now is not real, because it's so real and it's so vital and it's so important.
Yeah.
But understanding we are also expansive.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a both and experience, right? Like, I am both grateful that I have a body and that I have the cells that I do and that I'm in this particularly like condensed configuration that I'm in. And we can also recognize that there is something so much bigger and deeper than we can possibly understand through our conscious minds. And to me, like, that always comes through when I feel in relationship with nature. And so, like, as you're talking about, you know, can you go to a spring and collect water from a spring? Can you, you know, identify where that carrot came from? Can you, if you're somebody who eats meat like I do, you know, can you, you know, really think about the animal that meat comes from, instead of just mindlessly thinking of it as fuel and as just the material part that, you know, feeds our cells. Like, can we think about the immaterial aspects that are feeding us? And I think, you know, I think what you're sort of expressing here is part of that immaterial field is expressed through the water that we eat and consume and interact with in all the different forms.
Well, one of the interesting things, because there were three people who inspired me to start my work in crystallography, and the third person, his name was Thomas Hieronymus, and he was a radionic engineer. Turns out he was actually quite a genius. He really began talking about scalar waves very, very early, and you know, his work is quite extraordinary. But anyway, he made a very interesting observation when he went into a Parisian meat market on a really cold morning. And he noticed that the freshly placed organs of an animal seemed to be affecting the way the frost froze on the glass behind where they were placed. For example, the frost would freeze into the shape of a liver organ above a liver organ, and so on and so forth. And he had a hypothesis about this. It was that there was this information transfer that was happening, and he put that down to there being water in the blood. And each organ has a sonic signature, which is kind of like a cymatic imprint, if you will, of the form, shape, and function of each organ. And it has a sound frequency as well. And even though the animal was no longer alive and the organs were taken out, it was very fresh. And so that imprint was still present. And that imprint was sharing information with the water in the air. And what happened is that because there was information in the water in the air, that then left an imprint as it froze onto the glass in shape and form.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we kind of consider um, that information transfer, that's extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what led me on to think, well, he's seeing that microscopically. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
macroscopically with his naked eye. The other two
Mm-hmm.
people were a moto and a man called Laurent Costa.
Mm-hmm.
Laurent's work's really, truly amazing. He and I love his ethos. He doesn't experiment on water, and to be honest, I don't particularly like that word because I'm a body of water that doesn't want to be experimented on, and I give the water that I'm working with the same respect because I see it respond to me rather than react. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, there's an intelligence behind what I'm working with.
Mm-hmm.
And many cultures see water as actually a living being. You know, New Zealand was the first country in the world, which is where I'm from, to actually give rights of personhood to a river.
Wow.
The Whanganui River was being is cared for by the Whanganui tribe, and there is a saying which essentially is that the health of the river reflects the health of the people, and there's a huge sense of responsibility to it. And so the tribe was going to the government and saying, look, we're seeing people come and scrape the belly of our river, and we're seeing people effluents going into its mouth, and worse still, its headwaters are being diverted because the head is the most sacred body part in Maoridom, and so for them that is aquatic decapitation. And so
Mm.
after much trial and effort, eventually it was given the rights of personhood, and now they have 100% care of that river, of which they consider to hold the energy of their ancestors.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's a through line for, I don't know any, tradition that is connected to nature that doesn't hold that level of sacredness to water. I mean, all elements, but also water holds a special kind um, of honor, I find. And I'm so glad that, like, I had never heard that story before of that river. Thank you so
Oh,
much for sharing that. I'm so glad that that's happening.
yeah, and it was a few years ago, but it inspired the same thing for the River Ganges and the River Yamuna
Mm,
in India, although it's so difficult for it, so it's not held tribally or looked cared for tribally. New Zealand is it's quite a unique place, quite honestly. And so, um, we do think about these ideas um, that water is something way more than we imagined it to be, and this idea of water, being a relative or an ancestor, or
mm-hmm,
holding the energy of them. It's quite a unique idea for many people,
mm-hmm,
but I think when we look indigenously, or even in ancient terms,
mm-hmm,
water never used to be called water, even in old English times. Ancient times, they used to call water the waters because they
mm-hmm,
saw it all as there was a kind of collective, I believe, in the
mm-hmm.
old world where water was seen as a literal body of water rather than
Yeah,
just what we say it's a body of water.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so then when plumbing came into being in the Roman times, when they created plumbing and people started to see their waste actually being taken away by water, and there was a new visual of how water's just not there anymore. It's not just holy water. It's not to cleanse. It's not for all of these things. It's now taking away effluents. Water then became, the waters turned into water.
Mm,
And now we tend to reduce it to H2O. And and so I think there needs to be a renaissance of how we see and view and feel water. But also that term waters is used still in our language when we say her waters broke in relation to the
mm-hmm,
sacred waters of the amniotic fluid.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And and so, I always think the future is ancient because the ancients really understood the ways and workings and observations of nature and would spend a long, long, long time observing how nature moved and evolved and changed and got to know it rather
Hmm.
than constantly imposing upon it first, of
Hmm.
trying to work with its natural rhythms.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and sometimes I think that's something that we need to observe of ourselves, to observe our
Absolutely.
natural rhythms. I used to know somebody who would always in February, it was like after a long time of it happening, he made this real big kind of observation of himself. He seemed to be more vulnerable to hurting himself in February. In February, it was like notorious for him,
Mm.
like broke a leg, then next February, around the same time, he accidentally broke his finger, and then something happened the next February. And he's like, I think he just, so he said, I've now made February the time when I just mostly do all my work from home, and I focus on like just like all of the other things that I just know that I'm more vulnerable in
Mm.
February. And so he put that down to that being astrological and various other things. But we do have cycles, and if we actually look back at our the cycles of the big moments in our life, we might see,
Hmm.
oh, it's interesting. That's in alignment with that month that happened last year or
Yeah.
2 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I don't think that cycles. I mean, we as women, we understand cycles, and it's quite interesting if you think about if you get a bunch of women together and they live together, you often find there is a menstrual synchronicity
Yeah.
where their menstrual cycles start to like somehow come into sync with each other.
It happens with me and my dog.
There you go. And it does happen with other animals as well, like monkeys and another type, I can't remember what a type of tamarin monkey. And so, and yet, there's women have been reporting this forever, right? And even there's a book called The Red Tent. I think it's even a movie now,
Hmm.
where biblical times the women would go and be in the red tent because they were all having their menstrual cycles. And and yet science says it's just still not really a valid science.
Right.
But this is their waters being close to each other, syncing up, which
Hmm.
makes somewhat of what Luc Montagneux's work has suggests makes some sense, is that there is like something happening where there is something is happening with the information transfer in the water of
Hmm.
the woman.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
blood is very powerful
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
stores a lot of information.
Yeah. I mean, just to circle back to this concept of your body remembering these different cycles in your life, this is completely anecdotal, but I had shared with you in a previous conversation that I was a practitioner of acupuncture in fertility. And so I've supported a lot of women through a lot of miscarriages. And I started noticing, you know, some women would go through like and a lot of these women stayed with me for years, and so they would go through these cycles of like deep emotional pain. They're like, I don't know why this is coming up, and I don't know why I'm like having such a hard time this month. Or like they would have a particularly heavy menstrual cycle like that month, and so I started looking back into their charts and seeing like, oh, actually, like this is a moment where your body's asking you to grieve because you had a miscarriage this time last year. And so
Wow,
like
that's
yeah, and so your body has this way of inviting you into ritual, into relationship. And the way that our world runs right now is like we override and we think, oh, there's something wrong because you have dysmenorrhea this month. Instead of looking at that sign, looking at that symptom as communication from your body, now I'm sort of like digging into the layers in this conversation with you of like looking at that sign as an invitation from water being like, hey, like it's time to like look at this. Like I'm giving you a mirror here, and it's time to look at this as something that needs to be integrated. And so, if we expand this concept of relationship out and out and out and out and out, it's not just relationship that we have as an influence to another body in terms of healing. It's the relationship that you have to your own body because your body is remembering and And it's interesting to think about that memory as being stored in the cells of water in your body.
Well,
It's
I mean, as you're speaking, you're making me think that it's something reminding me of something I have thought of before, which is like every single water molecule is also having a relationship with every single water molecule. And
Mhm.
those trillions of water molecules each have a relationship with the other.
Mhm.
And I think that that's really potent because what you're doing by having a kind of powerful remembering, and you can, and the more we see these patterns, the more the opportunity comes up to heal them.
Yeah,
It's like,
absolutely.
okay, okay, yeah, okay, she said that this is my opportunity to heal. Well, if I actually grieve now and I'm having a strong menstrual cycle and I'm grieving, then maybe by the grieving, the next time this comes around, it actually will be different.
Yeah.
And let's see what we can do to actually help this, to
Yeah.
change this, to see this as an opportunity rather than, oh, here we go again.
Yeah.
And I know someone, because I had a wellness center that had just had the worst kind of endometriosis and would always just feel awful. Then had an operation and had some relief, but started to have like phantom pains each month. Like
Mm.
they were it wasn't by phantom pains. What I mean is her mind was saying you should be in pain now. And she knew like her physical body wasn't actually really in pain like it would be during her normal menses. But
Mhm.
she said that mentally she was thinking, she would always think, oh, you should be in pain now. And so she said, honestly, she told me, like, even though I wasn't in pain, I convinced myself I should be in pain.
Yeah.
So I just took some pain relief and I did this. She said it took her so long to accept that her body could actually be comfortable. And
Mm.
so then that was an opportunity to go into what makes you uncomfortable and
Yeah.
when was the first time you ever felt uncomfortable,
Yeah. Yeah.
and to really then ask those questions. And that's the wonderful thing of the ability we have to observe ourselves.
Mhm.
We can really, the observer aspect, which I think is that water aspect,
Mhm.
is such a tool
Mhm.
where I always say if I'm triggered by something or something's coming up cyclically, I'm like, well, okay, well, when was the first time you felt that feeling of whatever you're feeling,
Mhm.
rather than it being a reaction to moment, you
Yeah.
know, because we do have a choice as how we're going to respond to something, especially when
Mhm.
it's within our own body.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that there's um what I'm hearing in this story too is like through that witnessing, you are giving yourself that agency of choice again, right?
Yeah.
Like instead of feeling like, oh, I'm burdened by this, or I'm a victim of this, or I this is something I can't change, like knowing that in this case, what we're talking about is the invitation of pain. There's a wisdom in the invitation of pain where it's asking you, like with this woman, there was no actual physical, literal pain in her body, but her consciousness was asking her to revisit that and be like, okay, can I give myself permission to not be in pain anymore instead of holding myself to this old story?
And that's a big one with grief too. The grief,
Mm-hmm.
I know that a family member, my mum died in 1999, and it's always very difficult for people to deal with grief, and it can be so stunting sometimes. And someone close to me just throughout the rest of her life, there has been this deep grief. It's palpable,
Mm-hmm.
and there hasn't been the ability to integrate the grief because I think there's been a lot of grief.
Mm-hmm.
So with that has come some insecurity,
Mm-hmm.
some distrust of like, well, if there's pain just around the corner, especially with animals, with her animals. She's,
Mm-hmm.
very, very connected to her animals, never had children. And so there is this deep sadness that comes for when an animal passes away, or you have to go to the vet, and she has had to have some animals over the many years put down because they're very old and not able to function properly anymore. And this is very hard. Like, life is not a bed of roses the whole time. It can be extremely painful. But I've gone through my fair share of that myself. I was a horrendous car accident, 20 odd years ago, where we went under a 7-ton truck, rolled twice, and the driver, died immediately. He was decapitated, and I had to have 8 surgeries over the course of 20 years.
Oh my goodness.
And 3 doctors told me that I wouldn't be able to have children because of all the scar tissue that came from the seatbelt injury, where it crushed my organs. Plus, I had endometriosis. But still, I had a child for every doctor that told me I couldn't. And so, because we need to put what we're told about our body on the shelf a little bit, and then tune into our body, and just, even if it's just to allow for possibility.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be fully, well, they're wrong or any of those kinds of things. It's just like, well, let's just leave room for possibility.
Yeah.
What will be, will be.
Yeah.
And that's interesting with water. Water isn't in any resistance. And that's something I get to learn too, because whenever I come into resistance, I get to the opportunity to go, why am I resisting this? What is it that doesn't feel good? And it's not that we should go into every single thing. Obviously, we have to use our discretion.
Yeah.
But if there's something we want to do, and this is very common, people want to do something, but there's a resistance. Is the resistance just because it feels scary to do something new? Often the resistance can be, especially in spiritual realms, when you seem to be different than other people, and the people in your family or friend circles might think that's totally crazy. And so there's nervousness to go ahead and do what you want for fear of what other people will think. And I think one of the biggest things that prevent us from really doing some of the things we want to try is because we're afraid of what other people will think. After been I've nearly died a couple of times. And that's led me on to something that I have these death days, which sounds rather morbid, but I think it's very helpful, whereby quite regularly I will think, well, I'm going to actually act as if this was my actual last day, what were my priorities going to be? What am I going to think? And so even if it's my everyday and I have to drive somewhere, which when you have children and stuff, you're often like a taxi service. And so I drive to get the kids, and there's some song, and so we mindlessly listen to the radio sometimes, and there's some song just kind of droning on, and I'm like, is this the last song I want to listen to if this is my last moment on earth? And so I'm like, okay, let's find a song I actually like and listen to that. Let's actually make the most of and go into an appreciation for the people that we love, that we care about. Or even the person on the street. They're just like, there's smiles are free, just being nice and kind. Is really not so difficult. And you can really make someone's day. And, I had a really interesting situation happen where I was on a plane and I was flying from New Zealand to America. And it was during the time, just in the last couple of years, where people started look at you like you've got the plague if you even sneeze. And that was a horrible feeling. I actually, just as a separate note, I remember somebody literally sneezed. This guy sneezed, and I said, "Bless you." And he looked at me, and he just about cried, because he said, most people would be running away from me by now. No one has said "bless you" to me in so long. And so I was sitting next to this lady, and she was like, she had a cold, right? We could see she was feeling a little bit. And so I was sitting next to her, and I'm like, oh, my first thought was just that programmed thought. It's like, oh God, I hope I don't get sick, And then I was like, come on, you have a choice of how you're going to behave in this situation.
Yeah.
You're sitting next to this woman. There's no escaping it. So
Hmm.
what are you going to do? And I thought, well, come on, there's the inner healer in all of us. So, and I used to have a wellness center, and I said, are you okay? Can I get you anything? Can I do some, like, I can do some Reiki on you that might help, like, your nasal passages feel a little bit better. And she was so overcome with this that, because she thought I would just be trying to get away from her, like most
Right.
probably were. Um, and I never got sick.
Hmm.
At the moment I shifted into what can I do rather than
Hmm.
what's going to happen to me,
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
actually really made a huge difference. And
Hmm.
that psychological change can also really come, your fluids in the water and the intelligent water within you comes into alignment with your thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. I am just so fascinated by your life, and I'm so grateful for this beautiful work that you do. And to me, it's not just the work that you, and I mean, I think this goes back to your egg thing. It's not just the work that you do, it is this work that you're embodying, you know. This interaction that you had with this woman is not necessarily tied to your experiments that you do with water, but to me, it's embodying the same energetic principles of how can I be in this moment instead of being in this like reactive space of like pushing back and like I'm an individual and you better not get me sick, you know? like like what you recognize in that moment is like she's just a part of the collective just the same as I am, and how can I mirror compassion in this moment, which is like one of the beautiful gifts of water. It's the wisdom of water, is this ability to see ourselves in the other and have that mirrored back and forth to each other, and recognize that we're all interconnected in this beautiful web. I love this like visual of the spider web that you just shared with us too. And like to me that is the deep medicine that you embody. And the crystallography gets to be like one aspect of it. But yes, thank you.
I really appreciate that. And I think that it's nice sometimes to hear from people that have been through a lot of things. Like, most people that follow my work and they see all these beautiful pictures and they hear me and I talk and things like that. And 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 yet, geez, the first, I mean, 30 years of my life, maybe up until 30, um, of course, I've had lovely, wonderful moments, and I had a very strong connection with my mum before she passed in '99, and all of these things. But boy, did I have some trauma like through
Hmm.
my life.
Hmm.
And you kind of sometimes you look at that and people think, well, I've had all of this happen to me. Like, why did this happen to me? And I
Hmm.
spent a lot of time asking that question
Hmm.
seriously. And I'm like, why did I attract all of that into my life? Why was I not able to put up the boundaries to so that I you know wouldn't accept that behavior?
Hmm.
And there are certain things that happen to you as sometimes to some people as children that you can't have anything to do with.
Yeah.
And I've managed somehow from some of those things that happened to me as a little girl to find forgiveness
Hmm.
and realize that some things are not your fault.
Hmm.
And that's actually a medicine on its own.
Hmm.
That some
Hmm.
things are actually just not your fault. And
Hmm.
and within that there comes a relief. And
Hmm.
within that we have a choice to carry hate within us and mistrust and distrust. And from that I got to realize why I chose bad relationships and men that would hurt me, and I would allow them to hurt me because I was trying to fix something that happened to me when I was a little girl, to try and say,
Hmm.
hey, look at me, I'm good enough.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because when we have that aspect of somebody who tells you you're not good enough, that there's something wrong with you, and that you're different, or and I've always was really different
Yeah, we
growing
always
up.
internalize that as little ones. Yeah.
We do. But then we go and we try to fix it in our adult life,
Yeah.
and we often choose men, or certainly I chose some pretty badass situations to get myself into, whereby one partner once said to me, "I want to do to your life what a shredder does to paper." And I said, "Why?" He said, "So I can spend the rest of my life putting yours back together the way I want."
Whoa.
Total psychopath. I put myself in a position where I was so afraid to leave somebody that spoke to me like that. I
Mm.
was not allowed to look at another man because that was adultery of the eyes. He was religious, from a certain type of religion. I won't say because I don't want people to feel like I'm against that religion, which I'm not. But I know that was his interpretation.
Mhm, mhm,
And if I did, even if I looked in the direction of a man, like just some guy, I don't know, some random guy, he would get his fingers and he would wrap them across my eyes until my eyes
mm,
would water. And it was like, I still have issues. I have this scar on the side of my nose where he hit me, like where he
mm,
bashed my head into a doorknob and to the side of the door, the bit that sticks out,
mhm,
because I wanted to leave the room.
mm,
So I understand what it is for some people to go through horror stories,
mm,
trauma,
mm,
and I also have forgive him. I
mm,
also understand that he probably had the worst up, like some trauma in his life must have happened for him to think that that's okay,
mm,
and that if I continue to look for his his approval,
mhm,
then I will never be happy with myself.
mhm, mhm,
And then you start to heal. You start to heal and you realize that love doesn't hurt.
mhm,
And that love is this wonderful thing that we give away freely, and that relationships are all about, not just about love, but aspects of love and aspects of reflecting one another. And now I've attracted the most incredible, beautiful, loving partner, husband into my life, who treats me with so much respect, who sees me in a way that actually I really truly want to be seen. So clearly I see myself that way, who I can be
mm,
utterly open and honest with and share my most intimate secrets with, and he won't think I'm crazy. And if he
mm,
does, he just it adds to some kind of, beautifulness about me,
mhm.
and he lifts me up and never pulls me down. And when we actually do have problems, which every couple does, we're able to actually talk about them,
Yeah.
and not go, "You make me feel like this," but say, "I feel like this when." And
Mhm,
so, it's taken a lot of time and healing. That car accident I told you about,
mhm.
that guy tried to kill me. We were in the car. I saw the truck. He said, turned to me and he said, "If I can't have you, no one can." And turned the truck under, we turned the car under and we went under the truck and he died. I
Wow.
totally forgive him because I know
Mm,
he had gone into clinical depression,
mm,
and I didn't want to be in a relationship. We'd never even held hands, but he had become obsessed with me.
mm,
And if I can find forgiveness for these things, then I sure as hell can find forgiveness in myself.
mm, mm. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just feeling into these moments, and to me, like again, I feel like water's been really present in this conversation, and it's been like I think about water as being the element of transformation. It's the one that like moves through all these different phases and then brings itself back around again. And that's really what I'm hearing in your story is this element of transformation, and not coming from a place of force. Like it's not like, water is forced into like being evaporated into air. It is just such a natural process, and that allowing of that, actually, like now that I'm saying this out loud, it's like the allowing of the warmth to flow through is been the thing that's allowed you to thaw and to move through these beautiful moments of transformation in your life. And
Well,
I
sometimes we're kind of like ice. We take on that element of ice, you know,
mhm,
like people say, "Oh, she's so cold, like cold-hearted." We talk about that, but often it's because we have this frozen aspect, this
yeah,
ice solid aspect where we keep our pain. And we can
Absolutely.
put out that we literally, and when I had my wellness center, I would use that as an analogy a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And because that's how I kind of saw it in the body as an icicle, like an iceberg
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say my hand is very hot. I want you to really feel where the pain is. Tell me where it is. I would put my hand there, and really the heat would generate, and you could know when the person had kind of released, because you would always start to see their stomach getting bigger. They'd start to feel a little bloated, and then they'd need to go to the toilet. And they would always say they felt like they'd just kind of drunk about 27 glasses of water because of the
Mm-hmm.
amount of fluids that would pass through them.
Yeah.
And so there is something very interesting about this idea of kind of being a solid block of that area. It's like sometimes we think of these emotional traumas and we think that they're so embedded in us and they're so hard to get rid of. But if you kind of imagine that they're just ice, ice is a solid, but it can transition, it can melt, and
Mm-hmm.
so can we.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
might be that it leaves a memory, but it won't leave the kind of pain as much. So we can start to release. So I
Yeah.
still have all of those memories, but the pain I don't have, it's a story now.
Yeah.
It's not something that makes me feel super emotional about it,
Yeah.
because like you said, and what we've been saying, if we're really all connected, then they are just they there's a part of me that is in them,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
everyone that's given us love and given us.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
and within that, if I really want to say we're all connected, I have to also see, okay, there's some part of me that needs to that can help heal them, even if it's on some mild level by the forgiveness,
Mm-hmm.
and also for us. I
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes we just hold this sort of pain and this trauma. We feel guilty about something we've said or done or whatever. Um, but but we can change that
Yeah.
by becoming the person we really want to be and see in the world.
Yeah.
And then we get to inspire other people for for the fact that we're excited about something,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that we don't have to, we're not the same person that we were even a moment ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing, our entire lives are memories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Every single aspect of our life, except for this moment now, is a memory. When we look back at our life, all that we have, we're not seeing ourselves walking around in a physical, we're remembering it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so anything else is like in your imagination. We're imagining what might happen, but that
Mm-hmm.
hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
So when we die in this physical realm anyway, I think that the spirit or this subtle body actually transitions out of the body in a vapor, kind of a high vibrational vapor stage that we just haven't been able to see yet with our equipment. But I do
Mm-hmm.
believe that that's how it transitions, and that is the spiritual aspect of water
Mm-hmm.
transitioning into the observer, into the wideness of the air. And so then you kind of look at death, and you look at death and you kind of go, well, this idea that we have of death is really scary for a lot of people, because we're very scared about dying and letting go of this physical body. Well, if we have that fear, why are we not caring about it right now? Why are we acting
Mm-hmm.
like it's going to? We can put it off for tomorrow, but tomorrow might not come. We
Mm-hmm.
tend to, especially when we're young, we think, oh man, I've got all my whole life to do that. Oh, I've got all this time to do that. And and I would suggest, there's no time like the present, to love
Mm-hmm.
someone, or to tell them, to ring that person that you might be taking for granted sometimes, and you just figure they're just always there. So just ring them up and say, hey, I love you. Thank you
Mm-hmm.
for all you do. Just that can make such a big difference in people's lives. And this is all water responding to water.
Yeah.
Every single thing that we've talked about today, this myriad of experiences in life, is water communicating to other bodies of water.
Mm-hmm.
None of
Mm-hmm.
it is not about water,
Yeah.
although it might seem it.
Yeah, and if I could just cycle back to this really beautiful, like I almost want to invite the listeners to embrace this as a practice, is like when you envision that ice that's around your heart, you know, what I love about that is it's also acknowledging that water has a protective, phase, and that having ice is not a bad thing or a wrong thing about you. It is your body trying to protect you in the best way that it knows how until it feels ready and feels safe enough to thaw and to like allow for these experiences to be integrated. And so, like bringing in the warmth of your hand, bringing in the warmth of your energy, bringing in like however you want to visualize that for yourself and allowing for the ice to melt is a natural process. It's something that happens in nature all the time. And so, I think oftentimes when people are in their trauma response, I've heard this so many times where it's like there's something wrong with me. And I think the thing that I want to just like bring to light here and bring in the permission slip of is there's actually nothing wrong with you. It's just that water has taken on this form to protect you momentarily. And so it is your choice in how you want to deal with that armor. And it's okay that you have armor.
And also, I would add that, you know, sometimes when we get a shock or we kind of like get scared about something, we freeze. It's
Mm-hmm.
like there's like this freezing aspect inside of us. It's like
Mm-hmm.
interesting that term, we
Mm-hmm.
freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like something that stops moving. But the beautiful thing about the ice is that the melting stage is the fourth phase of water. The
Mm.
melting stage is the stage that I call the stage of creation, just as much as the freezing stage before it's a solid.
Yeah,
So in the stage between
it's the plasma, yeah.
liquid, yeah, liquid and solid, it's that plasma. But that's
Mm-hmm.
where we start to see all of this. That's the stage that where I do all my crystallography. It's where water designs. It's also where we have choice. The choice is to how we're going to freeze. And it is light that paves the way for the freezing, for the
Mm-hmm.
form and the shape of the freezing, because water is mostly photons. It holds all
Mm-hmm.
these photons. And this American Indian woman said that she gave me some wonderful, wonderful and the story. She said that she could speak to bees and that she would watch their hives for long periods of time until a bee came out and communicated to her and said, please don't look at our hive for so long. We don't mind you looking at it, but don't look at it for so long because your conscious expression is putting too much light in the hive and we like it to be darker.
Mm.
And if where we're putting our conscious expression is also where we're putting our light. And in this realm of crystallography that I work with, the conscious expression is putting more light towards the water. And one of the aspects to fourth phase or plasma water is that it absorbs more light. So
Mm.
within the light, there is information. And
Mm.
that information is translated into imagery in the ice. So
Mhm.
in the same way as we have this choice, sometimes when we have an experience, if we've had enough experiences that remind me of the first experience, we have a choice as to how are we going to react to it, how are we going to let it manifest.
Mhm.
And if it gets to that ice stage, then perhaps the ice stage can actually easily and very quickly melt away.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the other thing is that ice always will melt in heat. So, you know, that it's not hard. It's
Mhm.
actually extremely simple
Mhm.
analogy.
Mhm.
If we take on and have all the aspects of water, that means we have a liquid stage, a plasma stage, an ice stage, and an air stage.
Mhm.
And like there are 300 different types of ice. Within each type of ice, there are subtleties. The secrets to life are in the subtleties. We know so little about water, so we really know so little about our potential. And
Mm.
even if you just study one aspect of water and you realize that these four stages we've identified, there are many different intricacies about them. And if we have all of those within us, then means that there is this incredible life force energy flowing through our body with all of this potential for generating mass change.
Mhm. Mhm. I don't know how better to like summarize our talk than how you just beautifully did. Oh my goodness, this conversation was just so nourishing. Thank you so much. I wanted to leave a little bit of time, so if you're open and willing, I'd love to just invite you to share because you've got your masterclass coming up. I am so thrilled and honored that I will actually be one of the speakers for your masterclass. I'll be bringing in the Taoist medicine lens of water, and we'll be talking about fear. But I'd love for you to share what else is on this docket so that people can join us in that really beautifully conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm spending a lot of time in preparation for it. I only do
Mm-hmm.
3 to 4 masterclasses a year, and really it's kind of a symposium of things relating to specific topics relating to water. So the topic this year is what can different religions, cultures, faiths, and ancient texts teach us about water? And I think that this is wonderful to be able to get this myriad of different people from all around the world with different beliefs and cultures and faiths and whatnot to be able to come together with a common thread, the common truth,
Mm-hmm.
which is around water. And so, I have this wonderful selection of people speaking. I have a guy, I'm grateful, just got confirmation that he can talk. His name's Puma, and he's was struck by lightning at 6 years old and became an Andean priest. So he's going to be talking about his perspectives of water. We have a 75-year-old Catholic nun coming on to speak, and she's not like any Catholic nun you've ever met. She is such a spark and breath of fresh air. We have people talking about living waters. Of course, if you've read the Bible, you've heard about this term living waters.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean? How God spoke upon, the face of the deep or the face of the water, and all these concepts. We've got someone speaking from a Gnostic perspective, somebody speaking from a Druid perspective, somebody speaking, she's really this lady Olga from Russia. She's speaking about all the old Russian folklore, which involves so much about water. You're not
Mm-hmm.
to believe how much stories there are. And the stories are what are telling the story. We've got a Maori man talking about the aspects and how water is seen traditionally in Maoridom. And there's so many. A Jewish lady talking from her perspective. The Hindu perspective has got to be there, of course, as well, about the Vedic scriptures. And a Muslim man who studies quantum physics. He's just a dynamic guy. I'm really looking forward to his talk. And just so many. And of course, your perspective as well, which I think is really important and very, very insightful, because when the focus is on water, we really get to extract so much nourishment and wisdom. But we don't often get to be in a situation where we get to listen to so many speakers
Yeah.
talking. So it will be over 3 days at this point. It was originally two. Um, and so for anyone in the States and the US, it's going to be on the 3rd and 4th of June, and or the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of June. It will be recorded, so if you miss anything, everyone gets the recording. So, and people can. It's not open for booking yet, but by the time you post this, I'm sure it
It will
will
be. Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
And so that's you can book on my website, which is vadaustin.com.
And I also want to encourage folks. I've sent so many of my clients to you and your work. I'm thinking specifically of the herbalists that I've actually sent to you because I have one woman who, works with flower essences, and I was telling her about your crystallography, and now she's doing the petri dish thing and freezing flower essences. And I find your work so fascinating. And I think you have classes on your website as well so that we can learn how to do the
Oh
crystallography
yeah.
method,
I,
right?
I share more people's work now than my own, because there are thousands of people around that have got my PDF, the step-by-step guide, or have gone on to a small beginners workshop so that I can help
Hmm.
you get your freezing setting right and do this work yourself. So all of that you can get from my website, either in the shop or in the workshops tab. and there's lots and lots of images there. And then you can also follow my Instagram page, which I share daily there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you end up doing some amazing work and you do this, I'm likely to share some of your pictures. So and that's Veda_water over on Instagram. And I'm going to, if all things going well, I'll also be coming to the States if it works out. I have to apply for a certain visa, so depending on that. But there's an event called Lightning in a Bottle that I've been invited to speak at the end of May, and so that would be pretty exciting. And then we're doing things going well. We'll be doing a documentary filming from June through to September, which will be a 6-minute series.
Oh, amazing. Please keep me up to date on all these things. I'm sure you'll be posting a lot of this stuff on Instagram, but I'm really excited about your work and so thrilled that you exist, that you are that you are a voice for this beautiful element of water. And I'm so excited to be asked to speak at your masterclass. So thank you for that invitation as well.
Thank you so much.